At the far edge of the city stood an abandoned building known as Grayford Medical Center. Once it had been the busiest hospital in the area, filled with doctors, patients, and the constant sound of machines keeping people alive. Now it was silent, broken, and forgotten. Rust covered the iron gates, and tall weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot as if nature was trying to erase the place completely. 20 years earlier, the hospital had closed overnight after a strange and unexplained incident. Ambulances arrived before dawn, patients were transferred without warning, and by morning the building was empty. Officials called it a structural issue, but no repairs were ever made. Since then, no one had been allowed inside. People living nearby shared darker stories. Some claimed lights flickered in the upper windows late at night, even though electricity had been cut long ago. Others said they heard faint ticking sounds while passing the road after sunset. A former security guard once reported seeing a wall clock moving backward before he suddenly quit his job and refused to speak about it again. Children were warned never to go near the hospital. Drivers avoided stopping beside it. Even stray animals refused to enter the grounds, circling away as if sensing danger. On stormy nights, shadows seemed to move behind the cracked glass windows, shifting slowly like living figures watching the outside world. The wind passing through broken corridors created whispers that sounded almost human. And every night, exactly before midnight, one clear sound echoed into the darkness, the steady ticking of a clock counting time in reverse. Something inside the hospital had not been abandoned. It was waiting for someone to return. Ghost. The abandoned hospital quickly became the center of rumors among Ollie and his friends. Every evening after school, they gathered near a small tea stall, sharing ghost stories and watching the dark outline of Grayford Medical Center in the distance. Some claimed they had seen lights flicker inside. Others swore they heard ticking sounds carried by the wind. Ollie usually laughed at the stories. "It's just an empty building," he said confidently. "People imagine things when they're scared." One night, as the sky turned dark and clouds covered the moon, his friend Hamza made a bold suggestion. "If you're not afraid, go inside the hospital tonight," he challenged. The group fell silent. Everyone talked about the place, but no one had ever dared to enter. Ollie hesitated for a moment. The hospital looked different at night, taller, darker, almost alive. Still, pride pushed him forward. "Fine," he said. "I'll go." The rules were simple. Ollie had to enter alone, walk through the main hallway, and record a video as proof. His friends would wait outside the rusted gates until he returned. As they approached the hospital, the air grew colder. The wind stopped completely, leaving an unnatural silence around them. Even the usual city noises faded away. Ollie pushed the gate open. It screeched loudly, echoing across the empty grounds. Dust swirled around his feet as he stepped closer to the entrance. The glass doors were cracked, barely hanging on their hinges. He turned back once. His friends stood far behind him, their faces nervous now. "See? Nothing scary," Ollie said, forcing a smile as he switched on his phone flashlight. The moment he stepped inside, the doors slammed shut behind him. Outside, his friends jumped in fear. From deep within the hospital, a faint metallic sound began to echo. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed through the hospital corridors, leaving Ollie frozen for a moment. Dust floated in the beam of his phone's flashlight as he slowly turned around. The entrance behind him looked darker now, as if the outside world had disappeared completely. Inside, the air felt heavy and cold. The smell of medicine and rust lingered, mixed with something older, something rotten. Ollie took a careful step forward, his shoes crunching over broken glass scattered across the floor. What frightened him most was not what he saw, but what he didn't hear. There were no insects, no wind, no distant traffic. The hospital was wrapped in absolute silence, so deep that even his breathing sounded too loud. Each inhale echoed back at him from the empty walls. "Hello," he called nervously. His voice traveled down the hallway and returned seconds later, slightly distorted, like someone else had whispered it back. Ollie shook his head, convincing himself it was just an echo. He continued walking through the main corridor. Old hospital beds stood abandoned along the walls, their wheels rusted in place. Curtains moved slightly even though there was no breeze. His flashlight flickered. For a brief second, darkness swallowed everything. When the light returned, Ollie noticed something strange. The shadows around him looked longer than before, stretching unnaturally across the walls and ceiling. They trembled slightly, as if reacting to his movement a moment too late. He raised his hand slowly. His shadow followed, but another shadow beside it moved a second later. Ollie's heartbeat quickened. He spun around, shining the light behind him. The hallway was empty. Then the silence broke. Somewhere deeper inside the hospital, a clock began ticking loudly, slow, metallic, and wrong. Tick, tick, tick. And with every sound, the shadows seemed to grow closer. Ghost. The ticking sound echoed through the silent hallway, pulling Ollie deeper into the hospital. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted his movement. His flashlight trembled in his hand while the metallic ticking grew louder. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was slow, unnatural, almost deliberate. Ollie followed it until he reached a long corridor ending at a cracked wall. There, hanging slightly crooked, was an old round clock covered in dust. Its glass surface was broken, and faint scratches covered the numbers. Ollie stepped closer. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then his stomach tightened. The clock's hands were moving backward. Second by second, minute by minute, time was reversing itself. The ticking sound matched each backward movement, sharp and heavy, echoing across the empty halls. "That's impossible," Ollie whispered. As he watched, the temperature suddenly dropped. His breath became visible in the cold air. The lights above flickered weakly, though electricity shouldn't have existed in the building at all. The ticking grew louder. Tick, tick, tick. Ollie noticed something even stranger. The hallway behind him looked different. A hospital bed that had been overturned earlier now stood upright. Dust on the floor shifted, as if undoing footsteps. It felt like the building itself was rewinding. A chill ran down his spine. Slowly, he raised his phone camera to record the clock as proof for his friends. But on the screen, the clock appeared normal, its hands moving forward. Ollie looked up again. In reality, the hands still moved backward. Suddenly, the second hand stopped at 11:59. The ticking ceased. Silence returned, heavier than before. Then, from the wall beneath the clock, shadows began to stretch outward, peeling away from the surface like liquid darkness. And for the first time, Ollie realized the clock wasn't counting time. It was counting down to something waking up. Ghost. Ollie stepped back slowly as the shadows beneath the clock began to move. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The weak light from his phone flickered, causing shapes to shift along the walls. But then he noticed something terrifying. The shadows were moving even when he stood completely still. The darkness stretched across the floor like thick smoke, crawling toward his feet. Ollie quickly turned his flashlight toward the hallway, expecting to see someone standing there. The corridor was empty. Broken beds and peeling paint were the only things visible. Yet the shadows continued to slide along the walls. One long shadow twisted upward, forming the shape of a tall human figure. Another separated from the corner and slowly dragged itself across the ceiling. They moved silently, without sound, without source. Ollie's breathing became uneven. He waved his hand in front of the light. His shadow copied the movement instantly. But the others did not. They moved late, jerky, like broken animation struggling to match reality. A cold whisper brushed past his ear. He spun around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" No answer came. Only the faint echo of his own voice fading into darkness. Suddenly, the shadows froze. For one long second, everything stood still. Then all of them turned toward him at once. Ollie felt it before he understood it. They were watching him. The flashlight flickered violently, plunging the hallway into brief flashes of darkness. During each blackout, the shadows appeared closer than before. Step by step, closing in. Ollie backed away, but his heel hit something behind him. He nearly fell, dropping his phone for a moment. The light spun across the walls wildly. And in that spinning beam, Ollie saw the most horrifying thing yet. One shadow lifted itself off the wall completely and stood upright on the floor. It no longer needed the light to exist. Ghost. Ollie grabbed his phone quickly, his hands shaking as the living shadow stood motionless in front of him. The hallway felt smaller now, the darkness pressing closer from every side. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing loudly through the empty hospital. As he rushed down the corridor, a loud creak broke the silence. A door beside him slowly opened on its own. Ollie froze mid-step. The room inside was completely dark, colder than the hallway. Hospital curtains swayed gently even though there was no wind. Metal instruments clattered softly somewhere inside, as if invisible hands were touching them. He backed away. Slam. The door shut violently behind him. Ollie gasped and began running again, but another door ahead opened. Then another. One by one, doors along the corridor creaked open as he passed, revealing empty patient rooms filled with broken beds and hanging wires. It felt like the hospital was waking up. Footsteps echoed behind him, slow and uneven. Ollie turned, shining his light down the hallway. No one was there, yet the sound continued. Step, step, step. Suddenly, every door slammed shut at the same time. The thunderous noise shook the walls, sending dust raining from the ceiling. The lights above flickered rapidly, flashing between light and darkness. With every flash, Ollie saw something different at the end of the hallway, a tall shadow standing closer each time. His breathing turned frantic. He tried the nearest door, pulling the handle desperately. Locked. Another door. Locked. All of them sealed shut as if trapping him inside. Then, slowly, the door directly in front of him opened by itself with a long, painful creak. Inside was complete darkness. From within came the familiar metallic sound again. Tick, tick, tick. And this time, it sounded much closer. Ghost. Ollie stared into the open doorway, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness inside. The ticking sound echoed from within the room, slow and steady, like a heartbeat made of metal. Every instinct told him to run, yet the hallway behind him felt even more dangerous. He took a cautious step backward instead. The door suddenly slammed shut on its own. Ollie flinched and turned to escape down the corridor. His footsteps echoed loudly as panic pushed him forward. The air felt colder with every second, brushing against his skin like invisible fingers. Then he heard it. Another set of footsteps. Not ahead of him. Behind him. Step, step, step. Ollie stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. His heart pounded as he slowly turned around, raising the flashlight with trembling hands. The hallway was empty, broken lights, peeling walls, and silence. No one's there, he whispered to himself. He turned forward again and started walking faster. Step, step, step. The sound returned immediately, matching his pace perfectly. Ollie spun around again, shining the light wildly across the walls. That was when he noticed it. His shadow stretched long across the floor, but another shadow stood beside it. Taller, thinner, and it moved even when he didn't. Ollie froze in terror. The second shadow slowly lifted its arm, copying his shape, but moving a second too late, like something learning how to be human. The lights above flickered. For a split second, darkness swallowed the hallway. When the light returned, the shadow was closer, no longer on the wall, but standing directly behind him. Ollie felt cold breath touch the back of his neck. He didn't dare turn around. Then a whisper reached his ear, deep and hollow. You came back, just like the others. And the ticking sound grew louder again. Ghost. Ollie's body refused to move as the whisper faded into the darkness behind him. The cold breath lingered on his neck, sending chills through his entire body. Slowly, he forced himself to step forward, trying to escape whatever was following him. The ticking sound suddenly grew louder, faster, heavier, echoing through every corridor at once. Tick, tick, tick. The lights above flickered violently, flashing on and off so quickly that the hallway appeared broken into frozen images. In each flash, Ollie caught glimpses of shadows lining the walls, standing still like silent watchers. Then everything stopped. The ticking ended instantly. A deep silence swallowed the hospital. Ollie noticed something strange. The dust floating in the air had frozen midair. A piece of paper drifting across the floor hung motionless as if time itself had paused. Even the faint hum of the building disappeared. Time had stopped. Ollie looked down at his phone screen. The clock displayed 11:59 p.m., but the numbers no longer changed. Seconds refused to pass. His breath sounded unnaturally loud in the frozen world. Hello, he whispered. No echo returned. Suddenly, a cracking sound spread through the walls like breaking ice. Thin lines of darkness appeared across the ceiling, slowly expanding. From those cracks, shadows began leaking out like liquid night. One by one, they dropped onto the floor. They moved freely while everything else remained frozen. Ollie realized with horror that he was the only living person still able to move, and the only thing the shadows could reach. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, dozens of glowing shapes surrounded him. Then, far behind him, the backward clock struck once, and time began moving again, but not for him. The shadows stepped closer together, closing the circle. Ghost. As time suddenly restarted, sound crashed back into the hospital all at once. The ticking returned, louder than ever, mixed with distant echoes and scraping noises crawling through the halls. Ollie stumbled backward as the shadows closed around him. They were no longer flat shapes on walls. They stood like people, tall, thin figures made entirely of darkness. Their edges flickered like smoke, constantly changing form. Where faces should have been, there was only empty blackness. Ollie turned to run, but every direction was blocked. The shadows moved silently, surrounding him in a slow circle. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath turned into white fog. His flashlight flickered, barely holding on. "Stay away," Ollie shouted, swinging the light toward them. For a moment, the shadows pulled back from the beam, shrinking slightly. Hope sparked inside him. He waved the light again, trying to push through an opening. But one shadow suddenly lunged forward. Its arms stretched unnaturally long, touching the floor before rising toward him. The moment it reached his foot, a freezing pain shot through his body. Ollie screamed as darkness spread briefly across his leg like ink soaking into skin. He kicked free and stumbled away, but more shadows rushed forward. They climbed along the walls and ceiling, moving faster now, desperate. Whispers filled the air, dozens of voices speaking together. "Stay. Don't leave. Become one of us." The shadows grabbed at him, brushing his arms and shoulders. Each touch drained warmth from his body, making him weaker. Ollie fell to his knees, the flashlight rolling away and spinning across the floor. Its beam flashed wildly, revealing dozens of shadow figures reaching toward him from every direction. Then the backward clock began striking loudly. 1, 2, 3. With every strike, the shadows grew stronger. And Ollie realized the hospital wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to keep him forever. Ghost. The clock continued striking, each metallic sound shaking the walls of the hospital. 4, 5, 6. Ollie struggled to stand as the shadows pulled closer, their cold touch draining his strength. Darkness crawled across the floor toward him like living water. His flashlight flickered weakly nearby, its light fading with every second. Desperate, Ollie reached for it and grabbed the phone. The beam flashed directly toward the backward clock at the end of the hallway. For a brief moment, the shadows froze. Ollie noticed cracks spreading across the clock's glass surface. The hand still pointed at 11:59, trembling as if struggling to move forward. A sudden realization struck him. The clock was controlling everything. With the last of his strength, Ollie stood and ran toward it. The shadows screamed, a sound like hundreds of voices breaking at once, and rushed after him. The hallway stretched unnaturally, growing longer with every step, but Ollie kept running. Just as the shadows nearly reached him, he threw his phone at the clock. Crash! The glass shattered. The ticking stopped instantly. A powerful gust of wind burst through the hospital, throwing shadows back against the walls. Darkness peeled away from the floor and snapped back into corners like it was being pulled away by an unseen force. The lights went out. Silence followed. When morning came, villagers found Ollie lying unconscious outside the hospital gates. The building stood quiet again, lifeless and empty. Ollie survived, but he never spoke about that night. Something was wrong. Under sunlight, everything seemed normal. But at night, when lights turned off, his shadow moved a second too late. And every evening at 11:59 p.m., a faint ticking sound echoed from nowhere. Because although the clock was broken, time inside the hospital never truly stopped. Ghost.